They revert back to the employers and ask for more money. Now, look at the problem Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala is having. In Q2 alone, the total revenue for the federal government was about over $900 billion in naira. And then on the expenditure side, they have spent over 1.2 trillion. So we already have a deficit of about 300 and something billion.
How are we actually going to? How is the ministry rather going to plug those shortfalls?
No, the deficit is significant because the corresponding period for last quarter it was 3.1, but now it's 4.8. We don't know what is going to be in the third quarter because of all these dynamic developments that are taking place and all that. So you now see a deficit increasing, and it must be funded. And for you to fund that deficit, the government must either look outside to borrow money or come back to the local market to borrow money. When the government does that at the local market, it further takes up the interest rate. So you are going to have a cycle that is deteriorating and deteriorating. So when the CBN governors continues to emphasize that there is a need to make sure that we can stop the leakages so that we can stabilize our revenues, even if we cannot increase it. We normally do on the average about 2.4 million barrels per day. For that quota, we're on 1 point something. So these are significant issues, and I think it calls for serious national debate. Or even a serious national dialogue. Nobody is doing that for now.
Okay, so Wale, just hold on to your thought. When we come back, we noticed that the Central Bank of Nigeria also talked about how the money markets was affected by most of the policies that it actually came out with for this quarter on the review. So just hold your thoughts. How much impact has it had on the market?
Clearly, the most major thing that happened was the increase in the CRR. That is, that was moved by 50% on public sector funds alone.
It was moved to 50%.
Okay, on public sector funds alone. And the implication of that is this: it was a smart move by the government, although the banks may not like it, because it now puts them in a position to struggle to replace those monies with private sector deposits. It's not going to happen immediately. It's going to take some time. But the reasoning behind that was this. On the one hand, the federal government is managing deficits. They are borrowing money to finance their operations. That is on one hand. On the other hand, the federal government is borrowing these monies from the financial institutions. And meanwhile, a lot of the monies belonging to the federal government, they are deposited in these same financial institutions. So you have your own cash. It's in the bank. And now you need to spend money. You are going back to the same banks to lend you money. You can see the way it works. So under that situation, you can make the determination and say, look, let the federal government money, let it stay with the central bank.
But despite all of this, there was also an indication that banks actually had an increase in their revenue for this period.
No, not an increase in their revenue. That would be embellishing it to make it look good. What is happening is that they are collecting economic rent. And let me define economic rent for you. Economic rent is that returns to a factor of production, be it labor, be it capital, be it land, is that return that accrues to a factor of production over and above its marginal productivity. So if your marginal productivity should ordinarily entitle you to $1 million naira, for instance, then you are making like 10 million naira, 20 million naira. So you are getting far more than you are putting. And that is what has happened in the banking sector in the last 2-3 years. Because of the tight monetary policies, the rates on federal government borrowings on its own, federal government bonds and the rest of them, they are already in double digits. And let me tell you what economists taught us. That the higher the risk, the higher the returns. So if you don't take risk, you are not expected to make premium returns. That is theoretical. But it's also practical, because most people that make money, they take risk. But when you make money without taking risk, then you are just collecting rent. That means the system has created an avenue for you for just to make money. We have a lot of that in the political sector, and we still complain about that. Too much salary being paid to some sectors in the government and the rest of them. That is economic rent. Now that was brought into the financial sector, where for doing nothing. Banks are supposed to lend to corporations, corporate individuals, and private people, and take that risk. And then they get returns for doing that, double digits. Because they might lose the money. What if the corporate folds up? What if the private person cannot pay back? Then they have to write it off against their profit. That's the risk they take. But now, when you buy a federal government instrument, you lend federal government money, you are 100% certain that it will be paid back. That's why we call it risk-free instrument.
And that's why we had a lot of investors going towards, investing more in the federal government bonds for
it's because of the rent situation. When you buy federal government bond, you should not get more than 5%. That should force you to now go and take risk and lend to the private sector because you want to make 15%, 18%. That's the lender. But now they can sit down in their offices. Yeah, I like banks to make money, but at the expense of the economy. Yes. It's not sustainable. Now they can. So that is the problem we're having. So this thing you just said is a situation of economic rent. It cannot be sustained.
Well, you talked about premium. Now, we noticed that the premium on the Naira exchange rate widened in the second quarter. What could have actually caused this, and what are the implications for the economy?
For the foreign exchange rate? You see,
no, that's for Naira exchange rate.
The Naira exchange rate has been troubled. And more so in the last 3 weeks. That's not for the quarter we are reviewing now. But by the time we come back to this quarter, in fourth quarter, to review third quarter, we will see what has happened. The Naira has been under pressure. For the quarter under review, which is the second quarter, the CBN actually sold about $10-point-something billion in the market compared to 4.6 that they sold in the first quarter. I mean, we can understand because in the first quarter, things are just shaping up, the year is just beginning, a lot of corporations are planning and all that. But if you look at the gap, it's more than 100%. What they sold in quarter two compared with what they sold. But despite that, the Naira was still significantly troubled. Ordinarily, you expect that when you increase supply into the market, it should calm down the market and bring down the pressure. But it has not happened. And that is because the market is also aware of the challenges that the CBN is going through and the government, particularly on the revenue.
So they are taking advantage of that?
Yeah, because they speculate. You speculate in the market, and when you know that the supply source cannot sustain it for a long time,